This was called St. Joseph's previously. It's also the location of the Catholic Church, which no longer stands. Burial started from 1860, one child buried in 1859, along with a brother in 1860, and then the rest grew from here. St. Joseph's Catholic Church and Cemetery, dedicated by Father Thomas Dalton in 1860, was never rebuilt after being partially destroyed by a fire that swept through the town in 1920. In 1930, Colfax became a separate parish known as St. Dominic's. It's probably at this time that the Catholic Cemetery in Iowa Hill acquired its present name, St. Dominic's Cemetery. And in 1888, the church bell was removed to St. Dominic's Church in Colfax. Here's a historic photo. It's a very nice cemetery. It also says that the first Catholic priest to visit the area was Father Shanhan, pastor of Nevada City. In 1852, or the spring, around 1853, he headed through Grass Valley, Iowa Hill, Illinois town, and he held Mass for the first time in Forest Hill. 1854, Father Peter Dayert was appointed to care for the northern mines. He visited, baptized many in Iowa town, Iowa City, at around 1854. Father Thomas Dalton, which I was just reading about recently, succeeded Father Dayert, attended Iowa Hill area after his retirement in 1855. Archbishop Alemany of San Francisco and Father Dalton visited Iowa Hill to celebrate Mass preach. The minister of the sacrament of confirmation at Adelia, Mrs. J.T., they called her, Hill's home. He gave confirmation to about 5 Iowa Hill residents and ministered to a pretty good concourse of people. He liked Iowa Hill. There was a growing need for a faithful in the area to have a church, and in 1859 a meeting was held with James Gleason, who's buried across the road, to plan a Catholic church. A committee was appointed collecting funds, which included funds from Mineral Bar, Iowa Hill, Elizabethtown, Wisconsin Hill, Damascus, Monona Flat, Wolverine, Strawberry Flat, Grizzly Flat, Italian Bar probably. Sealed proposals were received from carpenters and builders at Samuel N. Calvin's office in Iowa Hill. Proposals were addressed to James Gleason, a secretary of the committee he was for the erection of the Catholic Church. George W. Currier got the contract, which was completed in June of 1860. The church stood on this land, which is known as Banjel Hill, based on records from 1860. The church was called St. Joseph's, so therefore this cemetery was named St. Joseph's. In 1864, the church had blown down. It was rebuilt. From 1865 through 1878, it was tended once a month from Forest Hill. Iowa Hill became a mission of Auburn in 1895, as was Forest Hill. Iowa Hill remained a mission of Auburn at least through the 1930s. Although, like I said, the fire partially burned the church down in 1920. And the boards were used in other Iowa Hill homes. After 1932, Iowa Hill no longer recorded in the Hoffman's Catholic Directory, and Colfax became St. Dominic's with Father F. McAney as pastor. It wasn't possible to determine when or why St. Joseph's Cemetery became known as St. Dominic's. Probably because it was under the care of the Colfax St. Dominic's Church. They were trying to do a good deed. The bell of St. Joseph's Church was stored at the Colfax St. Dominic's for safekeeping and is mounted in the front of the church. There's this Chinese cemetery, guys, in the woods, by the way. It's a pretty cool place, and I really like it, but a lot of graves are overgrown. You get the idea. This was the site of the church, a Catholic cemetery, and some of the earliest Catholic residents in Iowa Hill, which almost became the state capital. It was 10,000 people lived here, so you had to have a cemetery to house those who became victims of death or succumbed to death. Remember the story I told you about Conrad John Belte? That's how you pronounce it. I kept pronouncing it wrong. This is a native of Hildesheim, Hanover, Germany. Age 93 years, 3 months, and 7 days. Is it not Chinese? No? Oh. All right. I'd love to find the Chinese cemetery. It might be in the back. I gotta look. Oh, no graves? That's the Chinese cemetery. No, wait. One grave? They said that there's a couple Chinese buried in the woods. What? It was segregated, that's why. Not marked. They're not marked. Did you know this town had a bowling alley, a billiard hall, and a theater, a movie theater? This town was huge at one time. It had a soda factory, guys. This town had a soda factory also. This is an important town. And I learned about it recently. I said, you know what, I'm going to come enjoy the scenery. And not much scenery due to the fire. You can't see the canyons or the mountains. But on the other hand, it is very historic, and so it makes it all the more worthwhile even if you don't have much scenery. This is about as historic as it gets. Every grave has a tale here. I made a mistake, folks. M.R. Gleason was buried here. This is the cemetery that he was responsible for overseeing the church project, and he's buried here. And I cannot read his epitaph, but he has wrought iron. He was a very prominent citizen of the Catholic cemetery. We have a lot of little offbeat roads. We're going to take some of them, see what we can find. Keep in mind, there were Chinese burials. The unmarked are said to be Chinese, and they would segregate them. However, there's a Mason buried back here, so I'm very doubtful that the Chinese would be buried next to the Mason. However, towards the back where there's some unmarked, it's probably where they are. Joseph Colgan. There's a tragic story about him as well. A lot of people died young here due to accidents. Very dangerous here. Wow. Mang Butler. Hey guys. I found the Chinese area of the cemetery. The Chinese cemetery is scattered towards the back. Any of the unmarked graves are said to be Chinese. I read it on the cemetery site. There's one epitaph of a Chinese woman, that black stone you see right there, but the rest next to it are just piles of stones. I can't even photograph them. 3-4 little rocks on a mound is just not feasible, a feasible grave site. We can't even tell if it is, or if it's just comes from another grave site and just rolled down the hill. By the way, this is Indian Canyon, and that's where Indian Creek flows through. Joseph Papa, definitely not Chinese. There's a tragic story in relation to him. 32 years of age. Please get some readings before we go. Oh, we can't read this, see this historical photo or read it. It talks about Indian Canyon. That's all I can read. Many of the Chinese were buried in unmarks, like I was saying. And this may be the Chinese section. Look, you have rows of rocks in the center. These are outlining grave sites, but the rocks are just all the mud and winters and elements. They've sunken in the ground, or they're scattered from being kicked around. We're going to be heading on out of here. I've seen most of the cemetery. I can't tell you what's Chinese, and so when we put it on our site, I'll just put a few of the unmarks along with the black gravestone we found. She was Chinese. Supposedly the graves around Mang are supposed to be where the Chinese cemetery portion of the cemetery is. It's really hard to say. We're leaving the Catholic cemetery. Sun's going down. It doesn't help that the fires have made the area, have blotched out the sun in this area. It's a beautiful cemetery. It's a shame it's in the condition it's in. I did find a few graves that were cracked or vandalized. Cemeteries are the finest historic site within Iowa Hill or Iowa City. It's a great place to explore. We got a few more places such as downtown to check out. Across from the store is the Schwab House. It's actually a cabin, and I'll show everybody that site because there was about 10 to 12 graves, and they bulldozed right over them to make that cabin. It's a lot of strange things in relation to this town. A lot of tragedies, there was lawlessness, there was accidents. It's a great town. It has a lot of history. I'm not sure what this cemetery is, but it's outside the fence, so definitely get a couple pictures here. A few graves outside the fence, very odd. Barbara McClure, 1948 to 2002, gone home. Then we have this odd-shaped stone. Wow, looks like something used to fit in that hole.
Oh.
Animal, I'm gonna call you the animal. Animal, right? That's to put your kids in when they're bad. Look, we caught a mini squatch. That's mini squatch right there. You're stuck in there, kiddo. People's Park. Another part of Iowa Hill I never even knew existed. There's horseshoe pits. This is a newer fire department. There is an older one, closer to a general store, I believe. Very quaint here. Although it's not as historic as the one that held a wagon, you could see that a fire department was very relevant. It came too late. This town burned down in 1920 completely. If they had a more state-of-the-art fire department and volunteers, they probably could have slowed it down and there would be more remnants of the town. Fire was this town's worst enemy. This is the town that always comes back. It's called the town that never died. And now you can see why. It still exists and the trees are bouncing back, but it'll never be the same after the fires. It never was. Even though it produced 20 million in gold all the way up into 1883.